I want to meet this human. Dr. David Hepburn is, just reading this, co-host of nationally syndicated radio show Wisecracks, co-host of Oprah Winfrey Network show Biologic, author of The Doctor is Insane, which was nominated for several book awards, syndicated columnist for more than 100 newspapers across the United States and Canada. Okay, is this true? Like, this is insane. If it's true, enter it. It's gotta be, it's written here. Entered the Guinness Book of World Records as the highest scoring defenseman in the longest hockey game in history. Canadian naval surgeon in the Persian Gulf War. Soon the Cape comes on, the whole thing, we're flying. This is awesome. He's a doctor of in the 1996 Olympic Games in Atlanta. In 1995, he lived in a remote Pacific island of Tanna in the country of Vanuatu, where for most of a year, he was the sole doctor and bush surgeon to 30,000 Chinese, many of whom have never seen a white person or a man. Former team doctor to the national rugby team, as well as junior and professional hockey teams. Rugby Canada? Was it rugby? It was Rugby Canada? That's amazing. That's my sport too. Damn. Okay. I kind of want to be you a little bit. Has led 2 African safaris, one of Canada's foremost medical cannabis educators of physicians and the scientific and lay communities. He's a member of a whole bunch of awesome societies, Society of Cannabis Clinicians, the SCC, International Association for Cannabinoid Medicines, IACM, the International Cannabis Research Association, ICRS, Physicians for Medical Cannabis, PMC, and the American Academy of Cannabinoid Medicine, AACM. Without further ado, he's flying in right now, David Hepburn.
Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Myra. And thank you as an audience for believing that, because when people ask me for a bio, you can write whatever you want, so I do. I once wrote that I was a Pulitzer Prize winner for my autobiography of Life as a Repeat Nobel Laureate, co-written with Don Cherry and Snooki, and people believed it, so I write anything down here. But good to hear Joseph again. We were last together in Medellin, Colombia. Very surreal, speaking at the first Camera World Conference at the home of Pablo Escobar, and it was kind of interesting.
Did you make it to the tomb?
Did I make it to the what?
His tomb.
His tomb? He's not one of my heroes, so I didn't get to go there. But Joseph being exotically from the coast of Florida, I am from overseas. I'm from Victoria. But it's fine, we're on the same page here, and I will start by saying, okay, so full disclosure, I work with this company. This company started 14 months ago in a cafe with 3 other people in Lima, Peru. We started this 14 months ago. We're now 59 people. Just because it's Cannabis, so I'll just say that it is an indication of how fast things are growing. 59 people, 59 thoroughbreds from across the country. It's called Planet Global. And what we do, we are a supercluster derivative exchange involving frictionless evolutionary software platforms accompanying global production and distribution of CGMP medical cannabis. And we also like squirrels. I'm a doctor, I don't even understand half of this stuff. I look at hemorrhoids and things. This is it's an exciting company, and by virtue of expertise in different regions, medicine, government, regulations, industry and whatnot, social impact, very important to us. We were just evaluated at over $2 billion as a company that started 15 months ago. So Cannabis is a business, and it's a remarkable business. But how did this start? Well, one afternoon, many years ago, the phone in my office rang. And little did I know that within a few minutes of answering that phone, within 20 minutes of answering that phone, that the trajectory of my life would change dramatically and permanently. But just to give you the context of what that's like, what that call came into is, I was raised very conservatively. I was raised a Mormon, went on a mission, raised my family Mormon. Kind of the last person you would think is interested in cannabis for sure. I grew up not smoking, not drinking, never knew the taste of drugs, and I was asked to join AA, Abstainers Anonymous, because this was a tough thing for me. And this was basically you know, I stood out in a crowd of teenagers in Ottawa. Ottawa, as you can see, is very cold. But this was me. I didn't really belong in that sort of whole growing up with these habits that were very conservative, that were not very conservative. So I was a conservative person living in a conservative city, Victoria, in a conservative profession, which is medicine. How many doctors are here, by the way? Any physicians? So yeah, we're pretty conservative and we doubt everything. But in a conservative city, Victoria. How many from Victoria? Anybody here? A few. Yeah, Victoria is a very laid back, those of you who haven't been there, place. It's somewhat chronologically challenged. The average age is 137 now, and I think that and many of you, well, if you don't live there now, are going to live there, and you'll know it's time to go to Victoria when the focus of your conversation centers around the state of your bowels. And your hair, which never goes up and out of your head, turns around and grows inward, where it creates memory loss and confusion, and then emerges daintily out of your nostrils, your eyelashes, and your eyebrows, and your ears. And not just the women. Men, too, also have this urge to let down the hair. But anyway, one day last year, a friend of mine, who was a QA at a LP, came up to me and said that her mother had bad wrist, and that she wanted to put her on cannabis, and so got some cream, topical, and gave it to her mother. A month later, she asked her mother how it worked. And her mother said, well, I haven't tried it yet. It sat there on that kitchen counter for the longest time. Finally, she challenged her to try it, and she did. She called her the next day and said, well, how did it work? So it worked really, really well, but I'm not going to take that because it's a bad drug. And she said, and she takes Percocet. I just can't understand this. So, why is cannabis so stigmatized? So stigmatized in the first place. Why is it that at one point 20% of medications in the United States were cannabis derived, and now suddenly it's the devil's lettuce? Why is it that William Osler, the founder of modern medicine and a Canadian, said that the single best treatment for migraines is cannabis? Why is it that alcohol was prohibited for 11 years, suddenly was legal, and cannabis flipped, and it became illegal? Why is it that two possessions in the state of Missouri after 1937 was life in prison? I mean, I mean, the story, of course, is one, and I'm not very conspiratorial, but when I heard about the story of greed and corruption and politics, worse politics, and racism towards Latinos, blacks, and Hindus, this is why the stigma existed, this horrible but very successful Reefer Madness campaign. Now, I'm not going to tell you the whole story. Most of you are probably pretty familiar with it, but I would say that the bottom line, of course, cannabis is one of those very interesting triple-purpose plants that has medical benefits, it has oils and seeds, nutritional benefits, and it has that third benefit that got it in trouble. What's that third benefit? Yeah, it's industrial benefits. I mean, it's fiber. You make 5,000 things out of cannabis. This is a car made completely out of cannabis. There's a YouTube video of Jay Leno driving this car. Jay Leno, and he says, man, I hope we get into a wreck and it's a fiery one. Lots of smoke. This plane is completely made out of cannabis. I'm not going to talk about how high that plane's going to get, but it gets up there. And this is what got in trouble, was its industrial threats to other prominent industrialists. And that story is going to be best heard in this book, best read in this book. If you haven't read it, I would suggest this is one of the best ways to deal with the stigma of cannabis is through facts. This is really well written. It's a 500-page book, 100 pages at the back of references, so that you can see that the story is true, that when, in 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed, in 2 days, under a new border of marijuana, the only organization to stand up against this was the American Medical Association. So again, you can read that. And this is why people like Sanjay Gupta did something that doctors are never supposed to do, and he apologized for trying not to. And he said that for 70 years we've been systematically misled in this country. I apologize for my role in that. We've been too dismissive of the loud chorus of genuine patients, not only for whom cannabis works, but for some it's the only thing that works. And so there is this tipping point happening, and it's really interesting to read. But of course, America caught a sneeze and the rest of the world caught a cold. We were raised in an era, because of that, for 70 years, where this beneficial plant was, in fact, had connotations ranging from insanity, to criminality, to schizophrenia, to violence, when, in fact, the very opposite is almost true in addictions. It was linked to negatively perceived groups, such as jazz musicians, people of color, criminals, and probably worst of all, Canadians. So it was but hysteria mixed with hypocrisy is a very tough stigma to overcome. And hysteria and hypocrisy both exist here. Now, there are those who continue to buy into this tired, old stereotype of reefer madness. And it is not necessarily people who are uneducated. There are physicians, there are doctors who continue to resist this because of previous bias, because of preconceived notions and ideas that are loosely formed and firmly held and fiercely defended. They are there. And I'll come back to this in a second, but let me ask you, those of you, what do you think physicians' excuses are, or reticence is, when it comes to using cannabis? What do you think they're...
Insufficient studies.
Insufficient studies, absolutely. You hear that a lot.
Don't want to lose my license.
Yes, you don't do that. What else?
They'll get it audited by the DA.
Liability.
It's a gateway drug.
Wow, you hear guys are weird doctors. They're a lot worse than I thought. Yeah, what else?
If they know what the prescription's going to do, they don't know what the cannabis will do.
They didn't learn it in medical school. They don't know the ECS. Well, do they want to be?
No.
Does the bias that exists there? Someone says they haven't seen the studies. Do you think if you showed them 1,000,000 studies, it would change a lot of them? Not necessarily. So there is that bias that exists throughout all sort of education levels and things, and doctors will sometimes tiptoe around it, and the easiest thing that they do is say, if they come to one of the conferences and understand, and they go, you know what, yeah, it's okay if you want it, but I don't know a whole lot about it. Why don't you go down to one of those clinics down there? And that's what they do. So they don't really get immersed into the benefits, and they didn't learn it, and they don't get the benefits of it. And I would tell physicians across the country, it is extremely rewarding to you to be able to take patients off benzos, narcotics, and sleeping pills and Z drugs and put them on cannabinoids and have to come in a month later and say, thank you for your courage and compassion. Thank you for allowing me to participate in my own treatment. That happens, and it's extremely rewarding in your practice. And you're right, it's not a case of anymore, it's this single molecule, single receptor, single disease, single dose, single place. It's so easy. I mean, it's so easy being a physician. There you go. We're used to this. It's just real. Who treated, who have changed. People that I love are the most reticent of patients. Like a patient who had peripheral neuropathy of her arm. She was a well-known artist. She had galleries across the country. She had tried all the usual lyrics and whatnot, and nothing was working. This had created anxiety for her because this was her career. And she came and she was reticent, did not want to do this. She was in her 60s. She didn't want to do this cannabis stuff because it's illegal and blah, blah, blah. Finally convinced her to try it. And she came back a month later with her husband, who was a lawyer. And MOA said, so-and-so's here, Mrs. Loggins, and she would like you to, he would like to see you first. Great. He came down the hall and he shook my hand and said,
Harvest Medicine.
And said, we didn't believe in this stuff. We now want to do what we can. So I referred to that book, by the way. And they become advocates for that, and he's the lawyer. And I say this because of the fact that, these are the things that you can see people change from one end to the other. Yeah, so I was going to say that, I was going to tell you her name, but that would have been unprofessional, so. Mary Jenkins would have not appreciated it. So, the time has changed. It's time to do our part and change the narrative. We can all do it here if we take a few points. I want this just to be a useful takeaway for you, that you take a few points, and whatever they are, you think of, as you're thinking right now about these three people that you can have an effect on, think as we go through this, yes, I can try this and I can do this. But the first thing to do, as I suggest, is when you deal with people with previous biases and previous thoughts, you'll deal with people who believe that medicine prescribed by doctors are the way to go. And yeah, they think if they're pills, they don't care what they are. They can be octopus, it doesn't matter. If it's prescribed by a doctor, something's wonderful. Because pills are good. Pills at pharmacies. Edna down the road has pills. It's great. They're great. They're gluten-free, wonderful. Pills are fun, fantastic. But plant? No way. That's Cheech and Chong stuff. I'm not going to get near that. But understand that often their biases are based on, they're not their fault. So the first thing is don't get upset and angry. It's easy to get frustrated with people who have this stigma that prevents them from doing things, but don't be upset and angry because, you know, it's not always of their own providence. They've grown up under situations, as I did, where parents, grandparents, super great grandparents going way back have decided how they're going to vote, their religions, everything else about them. And so they have stuck to what they know, and they're frightened of what they don't know. So go and understand with that realization that this is not a battle. You're not going there to fight somebody and win. You're going there to basically, you don't want to knock them over. You want to win them over. And that's the important part of this. Because to change this narrative, we have to realize that people need to hear different things from us, depending who they are. This crowd, you know, they need to hear something different than this crowd. There's just two different things you have to understand. And that's important to come from that perspective. So again, here's what we can do. I'm going to give you 10 points. And of these, realize that, you know, as cannabis is undergoing an extreme makeover today, there are a whole set of facts that have to come down. And more importantly, there are a whole set of myths that have to be dispelled. What are the common myths that you hear that frustrate you out there?
Gateway drug.
Gateway drug, absolutely. It is a gateway drug off of opiates.
Addictions.
Addictive, okay.
Women don't consume cannabis.
Pardon me?
That women don't consume cannabis.
You don't?
Like it.
Okay.
It'll get you high.
Get you high, absolutely. What else do you hear that, I mean, that's true, it's a common thing, oh, I want to take that, I want to stomach.
The children.
But you're rubbing it on your knuckles.
Yeah.
Children.
Children.
Mhm.
It'll make you stupid. Yeah, it'll make you stupid.
She just said that. Okay, myth number one. Myth number one. Cannabis is dangerous, cannabis is safe. Those are both myths. Because cannabis is dangerous and it's safe. First of all, the myth on its safety. On its danger, I should say. So, again, we know that cannabis is safer than peanuts. We know that there's no receptors in the brainstem. Nobody dies of cannabinoids. 78,000 people a year die of opiates in North America, and over half of those are prescription opiates. So we understand that there is a tremendous safety profile. When we look at medications, we think of cost, efficacy, safety, and tolerability. And safety profile is massive here. All right, and that's an important thing that you understand, but it's a myth that is dangerous. It doesn't kill anybody. But it's also a myth that's not as safe as it thinks it is. It thinks it's pretty safe and shielded, but it's not. Because, in fact, it is also, I would suggest, there are contraindications that we have to be aware of. And the contraindications, of course, up in number one, is the age range. I think this continues to be important. I continue to research. I spend my day researching the research. And I do have concerns about its use in youth. The endocannabinoid system, which begins at 19 weeks in utero, plods along through childhood. Kids can tolerate it better than adults, THC, for example. But the endocannabinoid system begins to develop with the receptors, CB1-2, with the ligands, and then by2AG, and with the enzymes, and MEGL and FAH. They all begin to develop, but they skyrocket during adolescence. And there's a massive occurrence that happens, and we know, for example, that when that developing brain happens, as you enter adolescence, you actually your brain weighs less. It actually prunes. It takes away some of that density and begins to develop scaffolding and patterns and everything else. And this begins with just sort of usual things, and then it works its way up into it through neuromaturation, up to the prefrontal cortex at age 25. The areas responsible for impulse control and decision makings and things that executive thoughts. So again, this is this is the time when there's a remarkable amount of growth of the endocannabinoid system, all three aspects of it. In fact, there's more than three aspects of it. So the concern is by introducing phytocannabinoids to an adolescent brain at this time that you may in fact be doing damage with respect to downregulation of receptors, creation of enzymes. Why bother making these? Heck, we got these in the plant. And there are studies, there's studies each way. But more and more we're seeing a predominance of studies that are concerned. So I would suggest to you that, again, risk-benefit ratio is important here. But encouraging its use in youth is, I think, counterproductive. Because, again, this is something that's going to be, the youth brain is a brain under construction. We don't know what it's thinking, these adolescent brains, half the time. But it is, again, the importance of understanding that its effects on different parts of the brain at different types of neural maturation are considered quite important. So it leads many who may have a promising career, I believe, in to become a real doctor, and they end up instead working for the college. So I mean, I think that that's important to understand, is that you don't want to have that effect on these kind of kids. So, is it dangerous? That's a myth. Is it safe? Well, that's one of my favorite slides. Anyway, of course, and as Joseph was referring to, the baby boomer population. On the flip side of use, as we age, the endocannabinoid system, like many other systems in our body, begin to fail. And studies and research, particularly done in Israel, where they introduced cannabinoids into nursing facilities, were showing the benefits in this population, in the older population. They found that there was less spasticity, less tremors, less pain, better appetite, better sleeping, less pill burden, less burden on staff and family by introducing cannabinoids. So it's really a different product that works at different people at different ages. But as you age, a lot of the symptoms of aging, in fact, are because your endocannabinoid system begins to dissipate. So you start getting insomnia. You start getting more sensitive to pain. And I always said the endocannabinoid system, Ethan Russo says, eat, sleep, relax, protect, and forget. I've added to that without the endocannabinoid tone, we would be always constantly itchy. We would be in pain. We would have tremors. We would be nauseous. And these things, as they begin to dissipate, as we lose endocannabinoid tone with age, we begin to have these symptoms. Insomnia and discomfort and agitation, and restlessness, and all these things. So again, the endocannabinoid system is really, again, this is the demographic, as Joseph was saying, that the baby boomers and older that tend to benefit tremendously. It elevates their moods. In fact, in these research studies in Israel, it showed that they really felt a whole lot better, and this sometimes was beneficial. Sometimes it led to to headaches due to either hangovers or from having witnessed the walk of shame the next day. These are things that you did not want to have anyway. So take that off because she just saw that, and I'm sure we all would. We're having lunch soon. Anyway, myth number 2, and you hear this a lot: CBD, non-psychoactive, oil, medical, good. THC, psychoactive, smoking, recreational, bad. Huge myth. You're going to hear that from a lot of people, and you need to understand the facts behind that is not true. CBD happens to have an excellent PR company. These people, all right, so that they know by focusing on children and seizures, one of the most powerful areas that when you're explaining to your skeptic or to your stigmatized individual, this is hard for anybody to refute, its effect on the worst of the seizures activities with metasketchdo and debate. But certainly its effect there. Whereas the THC PR people, they're failing. They sort of leave this impression on people. That does not work very well. But we know, that how many of you ever prescribe CBD pure by itself? Nobody. There's always some THC in it. How many of you provide THC by itself? Shouldn't either. It should always be medically CBD in it, because of the fact that there are various receptors that they work on. And this is what you'll see in almost virtually all the LPs. I always say there's 3 different types of medicines when it comes to cannabis. You have THC dominant, you have the hybrids, and you have CBD dominant, and they each have their role. For example, and when I was in Peru, I met with the government there, because they were going to legalize cannabis, but just CBD, as some states have done. We're talking about 33 states have legalized cannabis. In fact, 46 of them have in one form or another. But some just do CBD and just a touch, maybe no THC. There's only 4 states that have none. So it's just about a whole country. But at any rate, what happens here is that we know that some conditions, I met with these Peruvian people, they had written down in the regulations, the government, that they did not want THC because there's concerns of diversion, and it's a narco country. And so this was a concern, and I sat down for 4 hours with the ministers of health and with the commissions, and eventually they actually did. The greatest moment in my last year and a half was the moment that they took the documentation and read it and came back the next meeting, and the health minister stood up and said, we're accepting these recommendations, and they removed all restrictions in THC for doctors to use. It was a moment that my jaw hit the ground. It was amazing. Yeah, but one of the things I explained to them is that there are some things that just THC dominant will work for nausea and vomiting, particularly, of course, in chemo. For conditions like, well, anorexia, it works well for that. These are THC for migraines, for Tourette's, for spasms, and even for asthma. And you think about the other options for asthma, the delivery mechanisms they're using, not terribly appealing. But I would say that THC for asthma, if you've seen the study, an hour after you've used inhaled something, well, actually, anyways, after you've used an asthmatic medication, like Ventolin, an hour later, if you've also used cannabis in studies, it's the same bronchodilation an hour later. It's remarkable. So that's THC dominant. There's a very small amount of THC required for that. So there are THC dominants. Then there are the hybrid dominant ones, and as was shown earlier, that it states that in this particular study, the Bradford study, that showed that certainly the states that had adopted medical cannabis, a reduction of a lot of medications, and far and away, number one was the pain. And then there's other things like fibromyalgia, arthritis, and its effect on stress. Very important is effect on stress, and we, a whole talk on psychiatry, but its effect on stress is important. The point that when people are using it, and again, they just have a much more calm response whenever they get mad, stressed, you never seem to get upset. How do you manage to control your temper? Well, she's obviously, on THC. I just go and clean the toilet. She's so this is, and then of course, there's finding the CBD dominant oils. Things like, and what they're useful for. And we see that, of course, they sort of take up a lion's share. Good PR company. The CTE, of course, is an important one. Seizures, EI ratios, excitatory and impaired ratios. You always get this. This is a great focus of area. Again, always good to talk to people about what it does for seizures on the GABA and glutamate receptors, or on the neurotransmitters, and the neurodegenerative conditions. Again, CBD seems to be something that is taking the lead. A new study out of King's College, I just spoke to them last week. They are wanting to repeat the study that GW did with CBD and psychosis and schizophrenia. So this is, and as I say, this whole psychiatric realm. There seems to be a lot of these things, whether it's psychosis, whether it's effects on 5-HT1As and depression, or whether it's effects in dermatology conditions like this. So CBD. So it's important to know that there are those conditions that have THC dominant, CBD dominant, and hybrid. And as you're talking to people, you can go ahead and emphasize the fact that this is what this is. This is not the one molecule, one receptor situation. Myth number 4, it should be subject to the same rigors and studies, RCTs, as all medications. No, it should not. How many of you have been to ICRS at all? Anybody been to ICRS? Yeah, and ICRS is like, 4 days, every 15 minutes, a new study and presentation is given by lab rats. These people talk, and I'm sitting there, it's just way over my head. I mean, I can't figure out the reverse agonism of the sphingolipid ceramide pro-apoptotic de novo synthesis. It's just way over my head. I'm trying to clinicalize as I'm sitting there, and I end up thinking about my dog, because it's just so frustrating. But you realize the amount of research happening here is astounding. It is astounding. It doesn't fit into the RCT model because it is not. It is a dirty molecule, cannabis, CBD. It's a dirty drug. It is promiscuous. It is basically, it doesn't do the one molecule, one receptor thing. I'll talk about that in a second. In fact, that was one of my talk in Medellin was on the various receptors that CBD attacks. But it's, or attacks, or works with. But please, in fact, there aren't a lot of studies, RCTs and CBD. In fact, there are very few. In 2017, the FDA sent a warning letter out to 4 companies to stop making claims about CBD that were not true, and they mostly had to do with cancer. So again, this is something it affects with cancer, cures cancer? No. This does not help. All right, so I tell you this because it's important that we stick with facts. CBD is an endocannabinoid modulator. It's very important, of course, to help with that endocannabinoid tone. It's critical that it does. But it brings us back to balance. It's like that metabolic balance. It's like the cruise you go on. You go on that cruise as a passenger, and 2 weeks later you come off as cargo. Or and it's what happens. You gained all this weight, and it's terrible. But a couple of weeks later, you've lost that. That's basically your endocannabinoid system, and this is what it helps doing. CBD is a negative allosteric modulator and a positive allosteric modulator, and a partial agonist and a reverse agonist and an antagonist. It does all of these things with many different receptors. It is not a pure one molecule, one receptor thing, so it does not fit into the RCT categories. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. You just cannot do that. Synthetic labs say this, and mindsets that we've had for years say, well, it has to be that. No, it doesn't. And in fact, it's like salt or exercise. Where are the studies that show that? They're not there. But we all recommend them, right? So it's that sort of thing. So let me ask you this question. If you were stranded on an island, and you could have one of either THC or CBD, one or the other, which would you take? Well, many think that THC is the more important molecule. The whole purpose of CBD primarily is to make THC work better, which is why pure isolate necessary does not work as well. Is because, in fact, CBD can act as in two ways, as a negative allosteric modulators, and it also acts by stopping the fatty acid binding proteins and therefore allowing more anandamide to compete with THC on the CB1s. So it helps not only THC act longer, but reduces the side effects, as we know, anxiety or heart rate that's increased. So that's important to understand. So again, it is basically, this is the area that Gervais, Lennox-Gastaut. Did you realize that, Epidiolex, the drug that's been approved in the States, $32,000 a year, but that you can reduce the dosage by 80% by adding little THC or THC, 80%. And doctors down there are doing that. So that's important to understand. These work together. So again, just to reiterate, CBD is something that goes on a lot of different systems in our body. PPAR gammas, right at the nuclear membrane levels. It goes to the TRPV1s, which are the pain-sensitive, the capsaicin receptors, the 5-HT1As, which are the serotonin receptors, and so forth. Many, many others. And it's important, the GPR55s. These guys, the GPR category, you're going to hear more and more and more about. These are not insignificant. They're considered orphan receptors because they don't necessarily have a natural ligand to be found. But the cannabinoids now are shown to be very powerful. We have CB1 and CB2 we always talk about. These are going to be CB3s. They even share a 16% genetic similarity to GPR55. The importance of what CBD does to GPR55 compared to THC and anandamide. THC and anandamide are agonists. CBD is an antagonist. It blocks these effects. Important in the world of cancers. These are just some of the other receptors. This just came out recently in the fall. The sigma-1 receptors, the effects on that, and that's what enhances opiates. So that if you take an opiate with CBD, you get better effect at a lower dose. And then adenosine and so forth. These are all receptors that CBD does at different doses. So they talk about potency of CBD or THC. The potency is, they have what's called an EC50 and an IC50, so effective concentration or inhibitory concentrations. And they can be very small or they can be large, which is why it's a dirty molecule. If you give it in one dose, you may just hit a few receptors in the body. If you give it at a higher dose, you may overwhelm several receptors. You start throwing THC, terpenes, and other cannabinoids in there, other medications and genetics, and it gets very complicated very quickly. So this is, to me, this is why patients will come in and say, you give it something for their inflammatory bowel disease, and they come back and go, yeah, it really worked. And my skin lesions cleared up too. Or you give something for pain, yeah, it really helped my knee, and I sleep like a baby now. It's because it goes onto these different receptors. This is the blessing and the curse of cannabinoids. Okay, these are good things, but when you're trying to find the exact single molecule, it's so frustrating to me because I've always had this thinking for years now, and I'm changing this, is that you work at the LPs to get an exact dosage, exact percentages of cannabinoids and terpenes, because we're going to find the right thing that works for this condition. And then next thing you know, somebody goes, yep, went down to the dispensary, got something from Hell's Angels from a ditch, and it works great. And you're like, what's going on? And so gradually there's this sort of, and you all hear that story, and you're grateful for small victories, and we do want to have things that are free of pesticides and solvent extracts and whatnot, but, you know, again, it's a very complicated issue. It's not easy. It's the blessing and the curse. Don't put CBD, THC into a box. Okay, it doesn't belong there. So, myth that it has to have these same studies that you have for PPIs and other medications. Cannabis is sedating. That's also a myth. So cannabis is, some cannabinoids are sedating, but some cannabinoids, in fact, are very stimulating and are weight promoting and alerting. But you know, you can have the exact same, say, cannabinoid, same dosage, but if you change what? If you change the, yeah, exactly. So if you change the terpenes, you can take somebody who's like this. Well, this is how you know if you give them too much, by the way. So there's ways, people say, what are the right dosages? And you try to think about the dosages that you're going to do, and what happens is you end up going, you know, I don't know the dose, and this is what scares doctors. I don't know the dose, the percentages, but you know, you watch them, and there's certain signs that maybe you've given too much of the wrong thing, and maybe you should adjust things a little bit because they are just acting a whole lot differently. So if that happens, if the habits the patients display are usually the best indicator here. Number 7, myth. Cannabis is easy to prescribe, cannabis is hard to prescribe. And I kind of got into that right now for why, but there's no such thing as CBD 20 milligrams exactly is what you need for neurodegenerative conditions, dementias and stuff. Yeah, good.
I was going to speak to this a little bit later, but I'm just curious. We had a really good question in Niagara. I'm not sure if you heard it, but someone in the audience said, how do we know what dose to ensure that we avoid the driving protocol, and because it is so complex. You're talking genetics, you've got genetics, recreational, and so there's no way of actually making sure you're hitting that nanogram limit per se. There's no way of actually gauging how it works.
Sure. And you know, and physicians are familiar with this already. Is that if you have 10 patients here with the exact same condition, and you give them the exact same medication, you could have 10 different responses based on pharmacogenomics, based on other medications, based on enzymes, based on sex, based on age, based on many different factors. You don't try to, you know, this is why this is a personalized product. Cannabis is personalized. It's not one size fits all. And you cannot assume that. You know, somebody could take it, little as small as dose, and be just stoned. Others could take 50 times that dose and not feel it. So, and it may also be the fact that it's taken up quicker in the brain, not in the blood. There's all sorts of things that's why these driving things are never going to work. These monitorings, these, I can't remember the name of the one in California that they tried that failed badly. But you're right, one size does not fit all. I mean, that's, you have to understand, this is a true botanical medicine. Okay, one size doesn't fit all. Good thing, cannabis is cannabis. No, it's not. It's cannabis. And it does one thing, acts a certain way. No, you have the same medication, but you change the dose. We all know about the biphasic. So that, of THC, for example, the biphasic sort of properties of this. So if you give a certain dose of THC, you can actually make pain worse and anxiety worse. You give a smaller dose of the exact same molecule, and suddenly the anxiety is a whole lot better. And that's important, again, to happen again. Once again, it is the terpene that often will change that into that. So terpenes have a huge profile. Number 9, somebody made this statement that makes you stupid. Well, you know, in fact, the experts are recommending this. Should be in every pharmacy, former Surgeon General of the United States, and all the experts are basically behind it, as you know. And that, well, it's not perfect, but it tries. Number 10 is just another substance to abuse. Well, not only is that true, I mean, addiction is about the same as coffee, but it's showing it can actually help those with various substance abuses, not just opiates, but all kinds of substance abuses that people that are out there. And cannabis can be useful in different ways. The CBD acts in the reward center. THC acts, for example, on the mu and kappa receptors. In opiates, this is just an example of again, a myth. It does not do this. So, but sometimes what happens is that part of the success in dealing with substance abuse and the decrease in recidivism has to do with the fact that they just feel good about themselves. Sometimes it's a little bit too optimistic, but they do feel better about themselves overall. How many countries in the world do you think right now legalize cannabis? Any guess?
35.
No, medical cannabis, I'm sorry.
35.
Yeah, 32 is what I counted, but that could have been this morning. Yeah, exactly. So this is an important thing. When you're talking to somebody, say, listen, this is a global tipping point, which it truly is. And in fact, it's remarkable. In the States, it was mentioned earlier, how many? And it is affecting all the social aspects of it. I don't know if you know this, but in the state of Colorado, when they legalized cannabis, was the same month that they legalized same-sex marriages, which had a lot of the right-wing, the Mormons, really upset. What's happening? The world's coming to an end. Until it's pointed out to them that in Leviticus, chapter 6, it says, it's very biblical. It says, if a man lies with another man, they shall be stoned. So there it was there. Another thing that appeals to a lot of people when we talk about it is, of course, money. Money means a lot to a lot of people. Of course, the whole cannabis industry, this can be convincing for some people. If you know one of those three people, though, you know what? Economics is important. Yes, it creates jobs. It creates jobs in the security department, in couriers, in trimming, all sorts of things, the thousands of jobs in my family alone. So, I mean, it's definitely something that does this. A couple of do's and don'ts. Don't debate, do discuss. Because there's, the thing is, if you start to deliver facts and anecdotes, that's much more powerful than arguing about it. Don't argue with people about cannabis, because convince a man against his will, he's of the same opinion still. So we don't have to fight. We don't have to fight against everything when it comes to this. Don't take that approach when you're trying to change. It was John Galbraith once wrote, faced with the choice between changing one's mind and proving there's no need to do so, almost everyone gets busy with the proof. I like that. But most people argue not to learn, but to win. So don't get in arguments about why it's good. What you want to do is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. I have a friend I go golfing with. This is physicians, of course. This is an important part of what we do. And we have a group of doctors, and one of them comes and he golfs, and he was against cannabis. But every time we went, I would ask a bit more. I would tell him a bit more. He would ask a bit more. And of course, with doctors, by the way, where the penny drops is the endocannabinoid system. So we start talking about it, and go home and read a little bit about this. What you want people to do is to basically wonder about it and want to learn more. And so every week, we would go out golfing, just bit by bit. And then we had a new guy come out golfing with us, who was anti-cannabis, and started with us, and Frank said, hey, no, this really does work. And we went from this end to the other, just by poco, little bit by little bit. So again, don't waste your time on those who think the world is flat and aren't going to change, because it's important that if they're not willing to, when you combust, of course, it's dangerous. Vaporization removes 108 out of 111 parts of what smokes, of what's incinerated at 900 degrees centigrade, as opposed to when you vaporize at different lower temperatures. But vaporization, this is the 2004 Oxford Dictionary Word of the Year. As we know, it has all sorts of things like this. But smoking, again, the vaporization aspects of it, this is actually interesting. And so when given the choice, pick the vaporization. There was just a study came out this week that showed, interestingly enough, that 10 milligrams of THC in a vaporization form is more potent than 10 milligrams that smoke. More potent. It's actually, it was out of Johns Hopkins. That was quite an interesting study. So again, we know now, you can combine this, because we know they come in. Dave Hutchinson, when I think of enemas, I think of suppositories. I think of him because he's the suppository king over there. This is how I think of him. But this is actually a practice that was done, which was for respiratory problems and GI problems, was blowing smoke up your keister, which is where that whole saying came from. This was a medical practice, for Pete's sake. All right, so yeah, we know what we're doing. So do avoid hyperbole. Let's treat this with respect that it deserves. We need to be a voice of common sense in a climate that can be highly divisive and can serve nothing by being too divisive and too hyperbolic, to be nothing but, in fact, sabotage the promise and potential and possibilities that exist there. So talk to science. Talk to science. Talk about this. This is very convincing. There's no studies. Well, how did FDA pass Epidiolex? Of course, there's studies. How did Canada and others pass? These are both pure cannabis derivatives. They are not synthetics. They're both plants. So again, know the ECS basis. Be ready to respond when people come and say these sort of things. Have a couple of anecdotes prepared. Always a good idea, particularly involving Charlotte Figge or Kyla Williams, right here in British Columbia. Great story that Dave's involved with as well, Kyla's Quest. If you want to check out a great website, kylasquest.com. Encourage people to do this. When people come to me and say, look, you know, what, I have this disease, it's Eastern Bohemian pseudohypoparathyroidism. Does cannabis work for that? We get that all the time. And I simply say, take your disease, your favorite disease, and Google that with the word cannabis plus whatever it is. And it will open up the world to you. Have an approach right away for some of these people, and they will, because suddenly they're interested. If it involves them, and they read something positive, what do you think that does to their money? So in closing, I want to say that as the benefits of cannabis are slowly coming to light, the stigmas are going to fade. They're going to disappear, and they're going to be gone. But we will look back at this one day as being a stigma that was archaic, that was foolish, and frankly, that was cruel in many ways. We're on the cusp of a global tipping point. To convert someone is important, not to the dark side or the light side. You just want them to see things from a different viewpoint. And that's important to do so. Because that is the way we will help the next generation to be able to benefit from a very benevolent plant. So it is important that you go out and you use this to help others, this knowledge. I love the statement by Henry Ford, an airplane takes off against the wind, not with it. And that's it. Thanks very much. Was that a figure? I just saw you point at me when you said that. You know, yeah, I mean, it started, well, in 1937. I mean...
1910, 1915, the Mormon Church. You had all the rule about having more than one wife. So many Mormons went to Mexico, and they came back years later, and they brought with them this loco weed that people were smoking. The church said, no way. Utah was the first state in 1915 to make it illegal. Remember, the criminal law is a state power, something like Canada was federal.
Well, if you have more than one wife, you need this stuff. I'll tell you, you need a lot. It's interesting because in September, I think it was, I spoke at the first inaugural Utah Cannabis Convention, which was that they, as you know, they became the 31st state to pass. Yeah, and I was able to speak just before Proposition 2, which was done, and went down there, and it is very interesting. It is, you know, how it's happening. But yeah, you know, the conservative population, of course, is one's the Nixon-driven, the Henry Anslinger-driven, and Ed Warmer-driven too. So, yeah.
You mentioned 32 countries legalize medical cannabis, and you mentioned that only this year it's what, $5.8 billion economy only in U.S. Correct?
Something like that.
All right. So my question is, what's your expectations? When do you think companies like Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson will get involved? Or do you expect always to be on a lower, small licensed producer level?
No, they're already involved. They're
not mass
interested-
production, research.
No, they're not doing mass production, of course, because they want to stay away from anything dry products, smoked and stuff like this.
No, they're involved in research. That's
Yeah.
I'm aware. I'm more actually asking.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting.
Licensed
I
producers.
have actually been contacted by some big pharma companies for different reasons, but they are certainly sniffing around the edges. They show up at ICRS, Roche, and others. So they are looking at the research. They're, you know, when exactly they're going to pull the trigger and say we want this particular capsule. They are, remember, these are of the single molecule, single receptor, single disease concept. Botanicals are providing a different concept to big pharma. But yeah, big pharma, big tobacco, big alcohol, big food are all absolutely sniffing around this massive.
But it's not about sniffing. Eventually, they will consolidate the industry like anything else. Small guys will get bought out, and it's not same as any other industry.
Possibly, yeah. Absolutely.
So my question: what's the time frame?
17 days.
How much did you smoke today?
I don't know the actual number.
Thank you so much. One more question. Okay, fire away.
James, as you know, a number of us are working with politicians and politicians.
publications on medical cannabis or marijuana harm. Now there's 28,800. Those are not peer-reviewed studies. There are many of them where you go into the case studies, but I've been told that they are not respected by the medical community. Is that true? And if so, why?
There's more and more that are. In fact, they're showing up in JAMAs and Lancets. In different publications, you're seeing some positive studies. What I tell patients is this. When I wrote an article for Zoomers, how to talk to your doctor, one of the things I say is, if you Google that disease that you have, you find one good article with one good journal, and you bring that into your doctor and show them, not 17 of them. Because you're right, you will lose some credibility by doing that. So like anything, there is a more respected journals. But I always get a kick out of people who go, I got into a respected medical school, and even ones that you can pronounce, Joseph. But you wonder about that sort of thing, and you think, well, so what? What kind of doctor are you? It doesn't really tell me a whole lot about you necessarily. So again, these studies are studies, and whether they're preclinical, observational, experimental, tissue culture, whether they're translational, bench to bedside, or whether they're clinical, you know what? They're studies, and whether they're done in Falkland Islands or in New York, they're studies, and it is a body of evidence. Case histories, anecdotes, don't make for great medicine, but they can't be ignored either. So this is the sort of thing.
But top med and doc,
Yeah.
respected.
Oh, sure, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, again, yeah, absolutely.
National Library.
Thank you. Well, that was excellent. That was wow, outstanding.